Sorry about that, Madam Speaker. Thank you for recognizing the time. Also thank my colleague, the gentleman from Virginia, from Mr. Good, for being with us here. I'm going to talk this evening and kind of follow up on a good colleague from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert, some astounding information, and I know that he offers it on a regular basis, and I wish more people would tune in. And of course, I wish more people here would hear his message, and more importantly than hearing his message, take some action in that regard. It's astounding in a year and a half that the people that are working, and everybody is that can do it, they've lost a month and a half of wages. A month and a half. You know, you think about how long you work every year to essentially for free, because you're still working, but you don't get the money because you got to pay your taxes, and that date moves a little back and forth, you know. Sometimes it's in May, sometimes it's in April, but then you add another 2 months. If you add another 2 months onto that you're working, but you're not being paid. You're working, but you're not being paid. That's astounding. As I understand it, the average wages under the president for a typical family, and I represent typical families, the average wage of a typical family right now has dropped $450 a month. That might not seem like a lot of money to people in Washington, D.C., people that invest on Wall Street, people that drive fancy cars and belong to the country club, but where I live, $450 is real. That's groceries. You're trying to pay, people are trying to pay the bill for daycare so that they can be at work, and of course the cost for that's going up. People are paying more every single day to drive the vehicle that they're struggling to afford. I talk to people every single day that tell me, I can't pay my bills right now, and I'm not sure what to do. I'm trying to decide, you know, how much to spend on food, because I know I got to have enough for gas, and it's not just enough for the end of the week. I'm never going to catch up at the rate we're going. I'm not going to catch up. What's happening? What are we doing? I mean, you look at the price of gas, and I mean, the president just released another day's worth of supply from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, Mr. Good, you haven't been here very long, but you know the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is meant for natural disasters or national security events. It's not meant for political crisis, right? So a day's worth of oil selling on the open market so that I imagine so the president can say, look, I'm trying to help. But it's like the firemen saying, hey, look, I'm putting out the fire when the firemen started the fire in the first place, right? Nobody says, well, that's great, but we're happy you're putting out the fire, but if you hadn't started it in the first place, we wouldn't be in this problem. I mean, are you talking to folks like this where you live?
Yeah, and it's the firemen. Thank you, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, our chairman of our Freedom Caucus, for allowing me to join tonight. But it's the firemen whose solution is to start more fires, quite frankly. And so you wonder, is this president and his administration, is there a devious, malicious intent, or is there just an illiteracy, a failure to recognize basic economic principles, as the gentleman from Arizona was just talking about tonight? But their war that they've declared on fossil fuels, their war that they've declared on the American energy industry, the dishonest and dangerous demonization of an industry that is vital to our economy, it's vital to our industry, it's vital to our national security. So to inherit, as you know, a year and a half ago, American energy independence for the first time ever, and $2 gas prices. I know we talked about in the 2020 campaign over and over, do you like Trump's $2 gas prices, or do you like Obama-Biden's $4 gas prices? Who would have known that in just a year and a half time, they would be so good at jacking those prices up to $5 a gallon? And then what is their solution to that? Oh, just go spend $70,000 on your Tesla. The more pain that you experience, said their transportation secretary, who knows nothing about transportation, has no experience in transportation, but said, hey, the more pain you experience, that just means the more benefit that's being enjoyed. And so, hey, buy yourself a $70,000 Tesla if you can't afford to put gas in your cars. But then exactly, so while it's making no measurable or negligible difference on the cost of gas or the cost of fuel. But what it has done is to compromise our national security once again, our economic security once again, selling off our emptying out our strategic petroleum reserves for political purposes. It is just an egregious failure once again by this administration.
What is an egregious failure? And I got to remind everybody that that oil, that strategic reserve, were put in there at rock bottom prices.
That's right.
Right? We filled it up and paid as little as possible for it, probably the lowest prices in decades. And now it's out there being spent at the highest prices ever, right?
Well, he might think he can go to President Trump and get him to sell it at those prices from 6 years ago.
Well, not only that, as the gentleman from Virginia, my friend Mr. Good, knows, that the president is, instead of going to Texas, or, look, I'm from Pennsylvania. We've got a lot of natural resources right under our feet. Instead of coming to America to say, can we produce more, he's going to people that hate America. Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, even as much as saying that even though Iran's sanctioning, we've sanctioned Iran's oil with this potentially Iran nuclear deal pending, they would go there and ask Iran. But we're getting too far afield here. Look, people are struggling every single day, and this is not due to incompetence. This is not due to negligence. This is a plan. This is on purpose.
They're executing the plan.
They're executing the plan. This is by design. Energy, we live in an energy economy, whether you like it or whether you don't, whether you agree with it or whether you don't, whether we can get to more clean energy at some point in the future than we have now, or whether we can't get there as fast as we'd like to. We are where we are right now, and most of us are reliant on the natural resources that are beneath our feet that the earth provides for us. And we've done a great job in America of doing it more cleanly, more professionally, more ethically than any other country on the planet. But yet, there's this war on these natural resources and a failure or a refusal to acknowledge that in raising those prices, when the policies raise those prices, they touch every single American citizen, every single one. So it's not just the gas at the pump, because that's tough enough, but the guy that's driving the truck that brings that stuff, he's got to pay a higher price, and so he's got to pay a higher price, he's got to charge you a higher price. And the electricity that's generated, that costs more. And so every single means of production, every single point along the way raises the price. And how is that manifested? People go to the store, whether it's the grocery store or whether it's a retail outlet. You saw one of the major retail outlets just issued their report that their sales are down on regular consumer goods because people can't afford them. People cannot afford to buy them. People are having to make difficult choices, not because this is just happening, but because this is being imposed on them. It is being imposed on them. We saw the Fed today increased the rate 75 basis points. And most people say, well, what does that mean to me? That means the value of your dollar. Every dollar that you get is worth less, right? Inflation. People say, well, what does inflation mean? Inflation is taxation. Inflation is the cost of living. Inflation is when you go to the grocery store, if you can find peanut butter on the shelf and you could afford 2 jars of it for your children last month, you're going to have to pay more this month, and maybe you're going to have to cut back on toilet paper that you couldn't get 2 months ago, or maybe you're going to have to cut back on baby formula that you can't afford to cut back on because your baby's crying. That's what it means. The whole way up and down the chain, the value of every single dollar you earn is worth less. Not to mention the fact, as my friend from Arizona mentioned, that you're already working about a month and a half without pay, more because of this. This is what's happening to the American people. And nothing is being done to reverse course to change this. Nothing is being done. I see my good friend, the gentleman from the great state of Georgia, Mr. Hice, is here. Just wondered if you wanted to comment on it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And listen, you're spot on. It's virtually everything. I honestly can't think of anything that the cost is not going up, whether we're talking food or fuel or energy or travel, vehicles, across the board. It's all going up to the tune now of about $500 a month that the average family is having to pay more. I mean, $6,000 a year. Literally, we are at a point in our nation's history because of the horrific economic policies of this administration and this Democratic Party and the policies that they are pushing, that families literally are having to make choices, and they are concerned literally about feeding their family, about having a roof over their head, about putting gas in their cars. This is the type of impact that these horrible policies are having on the American families, and it is all so unnecessary. That's what is aggravating about all of this. It's all has to do with policies, horrible policies. All of this could have been and should have been avoided.
Now, my friend from Georgia, I haven't been to the district that you're privileged and honored to represent. I have been to Mr. Goods, and I can tell you, hard-working, tax-paying, law-abiding folks live, a lot of them out in the country, right? Don't live in mansions, struggling to get by. I suspect you're hearing it in your district, Mr. Hice. I suspect you're hearing it from average working citizens that aren't connected to Washington, D.C., don't have some special privileges, struggling to get by at the grocery store. You know, we'd love to hear some of those stories, because those are real people that we're here trying to advocate for. They sent you here to fight for them.
That's right, and they are suffering. People across the board are literally suffering right now and having to make critical decisions in their lives, some even to the point of getting rid of their pets, because it's more important to get food on the table for their kids, obviously, than it is for the pets. And we've had 2 or 3 different stories of just that type of thing alone. And, you know, what is the administration's response to all of this? Well, it's to double down on things like climate change, which ultimately is just going to raise taxes more. It's to spend more money that we don't have, which just exacerbates the problem. And so it's horrible what the American people are facing right now. And it again is so unnecessary. We should not be here. We were not here just a year and a half, 2 years ago. Things were vastly different.
Now, go ahead. Yield to Mr. Good.
To Mr. Hice from Georgia's comment about the $6,000, average family paying $500 more a month, $6,000 more a year, that is net take-home cost. That means you have to earn some $10,000 to make the $6,000 that you're losing just to break even. So essentially, they've lost $10,000 worth of gross income to the Biden inflation, the Biden price hike. And you wonder about the administration, you know, do they not know or do they not care? Because it's not just the gas prices, which is, as we know, and we would hope that they would understand, but perhaps they don't, or again, perhaps they don't care, whichever is worse. But the number one thing that impacts American families, middle income, low income, fixed income folks, is what they're paying at the pump. But it's not just the gas prices that have doubled under this administration, but it's all of the other fuel costs that are going up. It's everything that is shipped, which is everything that we buy, so it's driving up inflation across the board. It's everything that's produced from petroleum products, driving up prices further. Then there's the lie about the fact that we could ever move to renewables anyway, which is a lie to begin with. Then there's the climate damage that they're causing because we're buying fuel from other countries who are not the clean producers that we are. Meanwhile, it's being shipped across the ocean, which causes more pollution. So it's contrary to what they claim to say that they want to believe from a climate standpoint, not to mention the embarrassment of sending our president, as Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania said, overseas, proverbial, gas can in hand, pleading and begging with other countries to provide what we can produce for ourselves, not to mention the national security risk dependent on foreign countries who hate us for vital energy, not to mention enriching Putin with the ability to sell a fuel at a higher price to fund his war, not to mention having Europe get greater dependence on Russia. The whole piece together, economically, national security, even the climate concern that he claims to have, is all compromised by what he's doing, intentionally, willfully, executing the plan, Mr. Perry, as you said, on the war on American energy.
And not to mention selling portions of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China. Again, a national security threat.
Who he thinks is a competitor, not an adversary.
That's exactly right. It's an adversary. Because they say so. We wish it weren't true, but they say so. But I'm reading that 26 million low-income households who had managed to put aside a nest egg over the term of the last presidency and the last economy before a year ago have had that savings wiped out just trying to keep up with the prices that are now occurring. And we're only a year and a half into this. We heard in the beginning, well, inflation's transitory. Don't worry, it's not going to last. And then we heard it's only going to be a point in raised small interest rate here or there to control this inflation. When are we going to stop believing these lies? This is not transitory. And now, of course, they're saying, well, look, this is not a recession. A recession is 2 quarters of declining GDP. That's what it's always been described as. But now, since the left is in charge, well, it means something else. Here's what it means to families that are struggling. They see no light at the end of the tunnel. They don't know where this ends. They're having a hard time paying their mortgage, their car payments, and trying to figure out if they can afford their insurance payments, which the government has really messed up. By being involved too involved in health care. There's no free market there. There's no price competition there because the government's too involved. People have to pay their bills, and they didn't have this stress a year and a half ago, but they've got it right now. And the worst part is there's no end in sight. They don't see anything changing, right? They just saw basis points go up again today. And if you're a young couple that's trying to start out, even if you're trying to, maybe you're an older couple and you're trying to downsize and you got pre-approved for a loan, when the Fed goes ahead and raises the interest rate, well, you can start the process all over again, can't you? Because you're not pre-approved anymore because your buying power just went down, I don't know, maybe about $100,000, which is significant when you're trying to buy a home and get started or when you're trying to downsize from the home you can't afford now. Mr. Hice.
That's exactly right. You are spot on. Listen, this administration can try all they want to redefine the meaning of a recession, but they cannot change the realities of what this means to the average family. And like you just described, we have people who are trying to get in homes, and with the hike today, there's no question that's going to prevent many people from being able to get that car that they desperately need to replace the one that's falling apart, or a home, or whatever it may be, loans of different types. This is going to, right out of the gate, take thousands and thousands and thousands of people across this country away from being able to get those things. I was speaking just this week with a leader in the construction industry in the state of Georgia, and I just said, tell me the truth, what you're facing. And it was dismal. It's like, man, we are seeing the brakes being put on in a major way. And of course, construction in Georgia right now is a major mover and shaker. And they are seeing it come to a halt. And his words, just along with what you said, we see no end in sight. It is just now starting to slow down, but we do not see on the horizon anywhere soon that this is going to be turning the corner.
They're getting hit on so many levels, as you said, Mr. Hice. Its housing costs are through the roof. Home prices, rental costs through the roof. At the same time, the interest rates are surging. We got a 75 basis points increase again today. Interest rates going through the roof. So they're getting squeezed terribly on housing. At the same time that inflation is eating away at everything else, their purchasing power generally. And so what do you have here? You've got wages have went up some 4 to 5%, but it's been doubled by inflation. So real wages have went down by 4 to 5%. So you're making less than you were a year ago. Your housing costs are through the roof compared to a year ago. And then you can't afford to heat your home, fill your car. And then to your point, Mr. Perry, earlier, the Democrats' response is to double down on the policies that caused it to begin with. And the president has even said, we're going through a transition. We're partway through the transition. When we get through to the other side, everything's going to be better. I guess when you don't have a job, when you don't have a home, when you don't have a car, and when you're dependent on the government for some meager subsistence to try to just try to barely get by, but yet you can say, well, I guess I have no energy, which is the same thing as how they define clean energy, then I guess they will declare that as victory with the policies that they've enacted and afflicted the American people with.
Well, Mr. Good, you're right. And you know, Mr. Hice, with all due respect, you live in Georgia, but Mr. Good mentioned heat your home. Now, it's the height of summer, right? The dog days of summer are upon us, and right now we're trying to cool our homes, and we're in fear of blackouts across these United States of America in the 21st century. Unnecessary, but a reality. California, Texas, coming across the country, all due to policy. But what's coming up is going to be devastating.
Yes.
It's going to be devastating to people across the country, especially in the northern portions of it, where I live, where Mr. Good lives, and you're going to suffer a portion of it too, the inability to afford to heat your home, because electricity prices are going through the roof as well. People realize it now, and they see it now as they pay for their air conditioning, and they probably raise the temperature in the home a little bit to try and help defray the cost. But heating your home is different, and being very, very cold in the wintertime, people die from that. People die from that, especially in places where I live, where winters can be harsh, and they're much harsher in points further north. That is coming, and when you talk about the rise of the cost of living, inflation, and essentially taxation, when you talk about that with no end in sight, people are trying right now. They can't pay their bills now. They certainly can't put anything aside to plan for what they know is coming. There's going to be a long, tough winter, which starts getting cold. It starts going below freezing just right here in Washington, D.C., mid-October. It's right around the corner, and it's going to last until the end of March into April and May of next year. It's coming, and right now, no end in sight. We haven't heard anything from the administration about how people are going to be helped to afford their bills. You know, you're not going to be able to sit in the car and turn it on and turn the heater on because you can't afford the gas. You ain't going to be sit in your home and turn the heat on. That is coming.
You're right, Mr. Perry. And you know what concerns me as well is that is what you just described is just a couple of months away from states like yours. They're going to start feeling the cold of winter and will need to start heating their home. So the question then becomes, okay, well, what are we doing about that here in Congress? And what makes me scratch my head right now, we're not having any hearings on this issue. We had a hearing today on banning guns. We had a hearing last week on attacking the energy sector. We're voting on bills this week about big cats, of all things. I mean, the lack of concern coming from the other side is devastating to the American people, who right now already are going through some of the darkest days of their lives, and it's only going to get worse as winter starts coming in the months ahead. And our colleagues on the opposite side of the aisle right now seem totally unconcerned. We're not even having hearings to discuss this, and that to me is inexcusable.
The solutions to it, as we all know: stop the spending, stop printing money, stop causing inflation by continuing the economic policies, the fiscal policies administration, and stop the spending, stop printing money that we don't have and driving inflation, stop ruining our fiscal future, stop causing, that's going to cause interest on the national debt to increase. The part of our budget that has to fund the national debt is going to increase for getting nothing for that. Secondly, stop paying people not to work. Stop incentivizing and subsidizing the wrong behaviors. Stop making people comfortable as we grow the welfare state, grow the dependent state. Reverse the energy policies, stop the war on American energy, unleash American energy again, go back to the Trump policies, lower taxes, allow more Americans to keep more of their earnings, stimulate the economy that way, stimulate growth and investment and in businesses, and then deregulate, end the regulatory assault on American businesses and American economy, and then finally cut and reduce government. We've got to do those things. That's the proactive steps that will take place. This administration and this Democratic majority has shown no willingness to recognize how they have caused these problems and how the American people are suffering as a result. But instead, they want to push through more of the Build Back Bankrupt agenda. They want to break that up into pieces and try to pass that in this remaining 6 months of this election cycle.
We can't imagine that our colleagues don't care. We can't imagine that. And we're not here to fearmonger. We're talking about real-life situations that are occurring. This is not about trying to invoke fear in the people that pay our salary, our bosses, our constituents. But we are here to defend them and to be their voice and to echo in these halls the things that they tell us, the things that they are enduring every single day, the things that they are having to live through. And when we talk about it happening right now, it is happening right now. My concern, among others, that it's happening right now is where there's no end in sight. None of these things are fixed overnight. This has been a kind of, I wouldn't say a slow-moving train. It's been actually a fairly quickly moving train for about a year and a half, where we've watched the decline of our purchasing power. We've watched the increase of everything that we can't afford, lack of things on the shelf like peanut butter, basic staples, baby food. We've watched all of that. These things take time to be resolved. And if they're going to be resolved at any point in the future, we have to get started now. That's right. Sometime. I don't know when it's going to be. We're here this week, and then we're going to be gone in August, and then everybody's going to be, we'll come back in September to see how much more money we can spend before the end of the year, right? And nothing on the agenda that I see, nothing so far that we voted on this week has done anything to lead us to believe that we're going to address this problem. So we're as frustrated for the people that we have to face every single day who come up to us at the grocery store. We're buying gas too. We're at our grocery stores. We're at the hardware store. We're at the feed store. We're at the clothing store, retail outlets, and they walk up to you and they say, well, what are you doing about it to stop it? Well, we're not in charge. We don't have the executive branch, Mr. Hice. We certainly don't have this branch. The power of the purse belongs in this branch. But look, you don't want to disparage sailors, but they're spending like somebody that doesn't care about how much money they spend. It is very, very frustrating. So all we're left with, Mr. Good, my friend from Virginia, is the rhetoric we have to let the people at home know that we think enough of them and we care enough about what they're dealing with to come in and make sure that it is put on the record for all posterity, for all time, that we recognize what's happening to them. We do not agree with this. And if we were in charge here, things wouldn't be happening this way.
And if I could just add a thought to that, this is not and should not be a Republican issue versus a Democrat. This is an American issue. Both parties, independents, people who have no affiliation, the country is suffering under this. I don't know if you saw the recent poll that said only 1% of Americans believe that the current economic conditions are excellent. Only 1%. 12% said it was good. That leaves 87% of this country admitting we are in bad economic circumstances in a variety of the spectrum there of how they described it. But 87%, that's Democrats and Republicans and independents and people who never vote. That's our country that is suffering. So I think it's important that we do all we can to stand up for the entire nation right now and say it's time to make some key changes. We have the free enterprise system is the greatest economic engine in the history of the world, and we are suffocating it right now by advancing policies that are just destructive. And the impact of that is not only on our economic system, but on individual lives.
With about the minute and a half we have left, I'd just like to turn to Mr. Good. He can close it out, or I certainly will. I think, Jody, you characterize it correctly. It doesn't matter whether you live in the country, whether you live in the city, the suburbs, doesn't matter what your background is, how, everybody's feeling this. Mr. Good.
Our future with these policies, especially on the energy side, look at California with the brownouts they're experiencing. That's our future for the country. Look at Europe, who is going to freeze this winter because of the way they have compromised their energy policies and tried to move to renewables, and they cannot heat their homes this coming winter. But, as to paraphrase what Ronald Reagan said, recession is when your neighbor loses his job. Depression is when you lose your job. Recovery, though, is when Democrats in Congress lose their job. Hope's coming.
Well, with that, I think that's well put. And with that, Madam Speaker, we yield the balance and thank you for the time.
The gentleman yields pursuant to Section 1 of House Resolution